Hey there, I'm Natalia and I'm a beer sommelier and advanced cicerone. I teach people about beer for a living because I believe that beer is simply too delicious to remain undiscovered, and I want to help everyone find their favorite. In this series, we're looking at beer's 4 main ingredients and their impact on its flavor. First up is malt, the main sugar source that's used in brewing that also gives beer much of its color and flavor. Why do we need a sugar source for brewing? Check out this video first for an overview of fermentation, then come on back here to learn more about malt. Ready? Let's get started. Malt is shorthand for malted barley. In other words, barley grains that have gone through the malting process. Barley is a grain that contains starches, which are long chains of sugars, but yeast can only ferment simple sugars, or short chains. So, the barley grains are put through a process called malting so that their starches can later be converted to sugars during the brew. Why does barley contain starches? They serve as energy reserves for growing a new plant, but they're kept under lock and key until conditions are just right for germination. So, by malting barley, brewers can trick the grain into thinking it's time to germinate, making those all-important starches accessible. Before we get into the malting process, though, we'll take just a moment to discuss why barley is the perfect grain for brewing. In addition to its starches, barley also contains proteins, which give beer body and help to support its head of foam. And importantly, it doesn't have too much protein, as that would create a hazy appearance in beer. It also acts as a source of nutrients for yeast during fermentation and has an outer husk which helps with filtration during the brewing process. While different types of barley do exist, like 2-row and 6-row, winter and spring, and even individual varietals like tipple or maris otter, our focus here is on the impact of malting and kilning on the flavor of beer, less so in the individual varietals. So, let's talk about the malting process. The malting process has 3 steps. The grains are soaked, begin to sprout, and then sprouting is stopped by applying heat to dry, then toast the grains. If germination was allowed to continue, all of those energy reserves would be used up by the new plant. It's this final step that has the biggest impact on the finished beer. The length of time and temperature in the kiln, where the grains are dried, then toasted or roasted, determines the color, flavor, and how much energy or fermentable extract each type of malt contributes to the brew. Malt is broadly grouped into 2 categories based on how much fermentable extract it contains: base and specialty. Base malts have loads of available energy reserves, but they also contain all-important enzymes that allow brewers to put that energy to use. Enzymes are molecules that help speed up chemical reactions. As we mentioned, plant energy is stored as starch, a long chain of sugars, but yeast can only ferment simple sugars or short chains. Base malts are not only rich in starch, they've also got all of the enzymes needed to convert that starch to sugar. This conversion happens during the first step of the brewing process called mashing, which we'll talk about in a separate video. Base malts are kilned at lower temperatures, which means their enzymes are kept alive, and they're kept much lighter in color too. A few base malts worth knowing are Golden Pilsner malt, Pale Ale malt, and Vienna malt, which gives a nice copper color to beers. Specialty malts, on the other hand, are added just for color and flavor, not as a sugar source. The high temperatures they're exposed to in the kiln destroy any enzymes that are needed for starch conversion. But these high temperatures produce a reaction called the Maillard reaction that creates some incredible colors and flavors, but we'll come back to that in a bit. Some specialty malts, like chocolate and black malt, are roasted, while others, the crystal and caramel malts, are stewed. Produced using a special method, crystal malts are roasted when wet. The high temperatures plus the moisture causes the sugars in the grain to caramelize. As these sugars become a bit too complex for yeast to ferment, they remain in the finished beer, making it taste sweeter and feel fuller. Generally speaking, base malts will make up around 90% of the total grain bill. That last 10% is then made up by a mix of specialty malts. A little bit of these goes a long way. While malt is primarily a sugar source, I can imagine you've started to notice by now that it plays a big part in determining beer's color and flavor too. Flavor-wise, nearly all beers will have some sweetness from malted barley. But, as most of malt's sugars are fermented by yeast, beer should really only taste sweet if there are any residual or unfermented sugars. That said, the flavor contribution from malt is largely determined by its color. In straw-colored beers, like Belgian wheat beer, we'd expect to find doughy flavors, like bread dough or uncooked flour. In golden-colored beers, like the Czech Pilsner Lager, we'd expect to find flavors of white bread or watercracker from the golden-colored Pilsner malts that they contain. Amber beers, like the American Pale Ale, will often have flavors of toast, caramel, or biscuit. Brown beers, like the British Brown Ale, we'd expect to find nutty, toffee, or chocolate-like flavors. And finally, in black beers, like the Imperial Stout, we'd expect to find flavors that are roasted, burnt, or coffee-like from the dark roasted malts that they contain. Many of these flavors, particularly in amber-colored beers and darker, come from a reaction called the Maillard reaction. While the chemistry is rather complex, the main takeaway is that at higher temperatures, malt proteins and sugars combine to produce brown colors and toasted or roasted flavors. Interestingly, these colors and flavors are also produced in other foods while they're exposed to heat, like meat, bread, and coffee. Hence why beer has flavors so similar to food, and why it pairs so well with food. But that's a story for another day. For now, the main takeaway is that one single grain can give beer an incredible range of colors and flavors. That said though, while malted barley is the main sugar source used in brewing, other grains can be used alongside it. To get technical for just a moment, any source of fermentable extract other than malted barley is called an adjunct. Commonly used adjunct grains include wheat, oats, rye, rice, and corn. Wheat has a higher protein content than barley, so it adds a fuller body and a slightly hazy appearance to styles like the German wheat beer. Similarly, oats add a bit of body and a smooth, creamy texture when used in styles like the oatmeal stout. Rye also adds a bit of body and a hint of spice. It can really complement hop aromas when added to an IPA, for example. Corn and rice are not used to add to, but to thin the body of beer, as they provide a sugar source without much additional protein, helping to keep beers like the American lager light and crisp. Brewers can also add sugar directly into their brews. This won't sweeten up the beer, as yeast will ferment it, but it helps to increase the alcohol content while keeping the beer's body nice and light. So there you have it, a deep dive into all things malt. While malt largely determines a beer's color, it isn't the only contributor to beer's flavor, texture, and strength. Beer's other ingredients, water, yeast, and hops, all play their part. So be sure to check back next week to learn more. Thanks for watching.